The morning sun cast long shadows across the Texas prairie as Sarah Mitchell guided her horse through the tall grass, searching for the missing cattle that had wandered from her family's ranch. The year was 1867, and the frontier was still a dangerous place where survival depended on courage, quick thinking, and sometimes pure luck. Sarah had grown up on this land, learning to ride before she could properly walk, and her father had taught her to shoot straighter than most men in the territory. At 22, Sarah possessed the kind of beauty that came from hard work and honest living. Her auburn hair was usually braided back practically, and her green eyes held a determination that had gotten her through more challenges than most women her age would ever face. Today, she wore her usual riding outfit, a simple brown dress that allowed for movement, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that protected her fair skin from the relentless Texas sun. The Mitchell Ranch had been struggling lately. Her father's death 6 months earlier had left Sarah and her younger brother Tom to manage the property alone. Tom was only 17 and still learning the business, which meant most of the responsibility fell on Sarah's shoulders. The missing cattle represented a significant loss they couldn't afford, especially with the mortgage payment due next month. As Sarah rode deeper into the unfamiliar territory beyond their usual grazing lands, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A low, agonized groan that seemed to come from somewhere ahead. She urged her horse forward carefully, knowing that wounded animals could be dangerous, whether they were wild or domestic. The sound came again, and this time Sarah realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was distinctly human, filled with pain and exhaustion. She dismounted and tied her horse to a scrub oak before moving forward on foot, her hand instinctively moving to the pistol at her side. What she found made her gasp in horror and disbelief. A man lay trapped beneath a massive steel bear trap, the cruel metal jaws clamped around his left leg just below the knee. Blood had soaked into the earth around him, and his face was pale with pain and loss of blood. But what shocked Sarah most was that this man was clearly Native American, a Comanche, based on his clothing and the way he wore his long black hair. The frontier had been at war with various Comanche bands for years. Sarah had grown up hearing stories of raids, kidnappings, and battles. Her own neighbors had lost family members to Comanche attacks, and the fear and hatred ran deep on both sides. Every instinct told her to mount her horse and ride away, to leave this warrior to his fate. But as Sarah looked at the man's face, she saw something that shattered her preconceptions. Despite his obvious agony, there was no hatred in his dark eyes when he looked at her, only resignation and a quiet dignity that spoke of someone who had accepted his fate. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with strong features and the lean, muscular build of someone who lived by hunting and warfare. The man spoke to her in his native language, his voice weak but still carrying an odd gentleness. Though Sarah didn't understand the words, she somehow sensed he was telling her to leave, to save herself from whatever danger his presence might bring to her. Sarah found herself kneeling beside him before she had consciously made the decision to help. Up close, she could see that the trap had been set by someone. This was no accident. The steel jaws had bitten deep into his leg, and she could see that infection was already beginning to set in around the wound. Without medical attention soon, this man would certainly die. "I'm going to help you," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure he could understand English. The Comanche warrior's eyes widened in surprise, and he tried to push himself away from her with his hands, speaking urgently in his own language. Sarah understood his meaning even without knowing his words. He was trying to protect her from the consequences of helping him. But Sarah Mitchell had never been one to abandon someone in need, regardless of who they were. Her mother had been a devout Christian woman who had instilled in her daughter the belief that all people were children of God, deserving of compassion and mercy. That teaching had never been tested like this before, but Sarah found her moral convictions stronger than her fear. The steel trap was old but well-maintained, probably left by hunters or trappers who used them to catch wolves or other predators. The spring mechanism was incredibly powerful, designed to hold animals much larger and stronger than humans. Sarah examined the trap carefully, trying to understand how it worked. She had seen her father work with similar traps before, though never ones this large. The key was to compress the springs on either side simultaneously, which would release the pressure on the jaws. But the trap was designed to require the strength of two full-grown men working together. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, partly to keep the man conscious and partly because she needed to think of him as a person, not just as the enemy. The warrior studied her face for a long moment before responding. "Iana calls me Running Wolf," he said in careful but clear English, using what Sarah assumed was the white name someone had given him. Sarah was surprised by how well he spoke her language, but she tried not to let it show. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm going to get this trap off your leg, but I need you to help me." Running Wolf shook his head weakly. "You should go. My people will come looking for me if they find you here." "Then we'd better work fast," Sarah replied, already examining the trap mechanism more closely. She could see that Running Wolf had tried to free himself, but had only succeeded in driving the jaws deeper into his leg. The muscles in his shoulders and arms showed the strain of his efforts, and his hands were bloody from trying to pry at the metal. Sarah quickly formulated a plan. She couldn't operate the release mechanism alone, but if she could create some kind of leverage system, she might be able to apply enough force to compress the springs. She looked around the immediate area and spotted several fallen branches from a recent storm. Working quickly, Sarah gathered the sturdiest pieces of wood she could find. Running Wolf watched her work with growing amazement, clearly unable to understand why this white woman would risk herself to help him. The cultural divide between their peoples was vast, built on years of conflict and mistrust. Yet here she was, kneeling in the dirt beside him, focused entirely on saving his life. "Why?" Running Wolf asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah paused in her work to meet his eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "Because you're hurt and I can help." The warrior studied her face as if seeing something he had never expected to find in a white person. In his world, enemies were enemies, and mercy was often seen as weakness. But there was nothing weak about this woman who had chosen to risk everything to help a stranger from a people at war with her own. Sarah created a makeshift lever system using the strongest branch as a fulcrum and positioning smaller branches to press against the trap's springs. It was crude engineering, but she hoped it would provide enough mechanical advantage to release the trap. "When I count to 3, you need to try to pull your leg back," she instructed. "It's going to hurt terribly, but it's the only way." Running Wolf nodded, gripping the grass with both hands and preparing himself for the pain. Sarah positioned herself at the lever and began applying pressure. The wood creaked ominously, and for a moment she feared her improvised tool would break. But slowly, incredibly slowly, she began to see the trap's jaws start to separate. 1, 2, 3. Running Wolf pulled with all his remaining strength, while Sarah threw her full weight against the lever. The trap opened just enough for him to wrench his mangled leg free before the mechanism snapped shut again with a sound like a gunshot. Both of them collapsed from the effort, breathing heavily. Running Wolf's leg was bleeding freely now, but at least he was no longer trapped. Sarah could see that the bone might be broken, and the wound would need immediate attention to prevent infection and further blood loss. "Can you ride?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Running Wolf tried to move his injured leg and immediately went pale with pain. "I don't think so," he admitted. Sarah looked around desperately. Her horse could carry one person easily, but 2 riders with one badly injured would be a challenge, especially over rough terrain. More importantly, where could she take him? She couldn't bring a Comanche warrior back to her ranch. Tom would never understand, and their neighbors would be outraged. But she couldn't just leave him here to die either. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles north of here," she said, thinking aloud. "It's been abandoned for years, but it's got walls and a roof. I could get you there, tend to your wound." Running Wolf was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You would do this, even knowing what my people have done to yours." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "What you did to my people, or what my people did to yours? This war has hurt everyone, but I won't let it make me into someone who can walk away from a person in need." The words seemed to affect Running Wolf deeply. In his culture, honor and courage were the highest virtues, and what this woman was showing him displayed both in abundance. She was risking not just her safety but her reputation and possibly her life to help an enemy. Getting Running Wolf onto Sarah's horse proved to be an ordeal in itself. She had to fashion a crude stretcher from branches and her own shawl to support his injured leg, then help him mount behind her. Every movement caused him obvious agony, but he endured it without complaint. The ride to the line shack was slow and difficult. Sarah had to pick her way carefully over the uneven ground, trying to avoid jolting Running Wolf's injured leg while still making reasonable time. She kept glancing back at the horizon, watching for signs of other riders, either Comanche searching for their missing warrior or her own neighbors who might not understand her actions. Running Wolf remained conscious during the journey, though Sarah could feel his strength ebbing. He spoke little, but she was aware of his presence behind her, his breathing sometimes sharp with pain when the horse hit a rough patch. The line shack was exactly as Sarah remembered it, a small, sturdy building that had once housed ranch hands during cattle drives. It had a good roof and solid walls, with a stone fireplace and a well nearby. Most importantly, it was isolated and unlikely to receive unexpected visitors. Getting Running Wolf inside and settled took nearly all of Sarah's remaining strength. She managed to get him lying on the single cot, then immediately set about examining his wound more carefully. What she saw made her stomach clench with worry. The trap had done tremendous damage. The bones in his lower leg were certainly broken in multiple places, and the muscle tissue was severely lacerated. The wound was already showing signs of infection, with angry red streaks radiating outward from the bite marks. Without proper medical care, Running Wolf would lose his leg at best, his life at worst. Sarah had basic knowledge of field medicine, frontier life required it. But this injury was beyond her experience. She cleaned the wound as best she could with water from the well and torn strips from her petticoat, then bound it tightly to control the bleeding. "You need a real doctor," she told Running Wolf as she worked. "Your people's medicine man would not help me," he replied, his voice tight with pain. Sarah knew he was right. Dr. Patterson in town had strong feelings about Indians and would never treat a Comanche, even if Sarah could somehow get Running Wolf there without being discovered. As she tended to his wound, Sarah found herself studying Running Wolf's face. Away from the immediate crisis of freeing him from the trap, she had time to really look at him as a person. There was an intelligence in his dark eyes that spoke of education and deep thought. His hands, when they weren't clenched with pain, were long-fingered and gentle, more like those of a craftsman than a warrior. "You speak English very well," she observed as she bandaged his leg. "I lived for 3 years with a missionary family when I was young," Running Wolf explained, "before I understood that learning the white man's ways would not save my people." There was sadness in his voice that touched something in Sarah's heart. She had never thought about the individual stories behind the conflict between her people and his, had never considered that there might be men like Running Wolf who had tried to bridge the gap between worlds. "Why were you alone out here?" she asked as she finished her work. Running Wolf was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I was hunting. Food has been scarce this season and my people are hungry." The simple honesty of his response struck Sarah powerfully. This man hadn't been out raiding or looking for trouble. He had been trying to feed his family and tribe. The thought that he had been caught in a trap meant for animals while simply trying to survive made her decision to help him feel even more right. Night was falling by the time Sarah had done everything she could for Running Wolf's injury. She had managed to start a fire in the fireplace and heat water for cleaning the wound more thoroughly. The warrior had endured her ministrations without complaint, though she could see the pain in his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "You should go back to your home," Running Wolf said as Sarah prepared to settle in for the night. "This place is not safe for you." "It's not safe for you either," Sarah replied, "and you can't travel with that leg." She had been trying not to think about the implications of staying here overnight with a Comanche warrior. If anyone discovered them, her reputation would be destroyed at the very least. But the practical reality was that Running Wolf needed constant care, and she couldn't abandon him now. "What will you tell your family?" Running Wolf asked, as if reading her thoughts. "That I'm still looking for the missing cattle," Sarah said. "Tom won't worry unless I'm gone for several days." Running Wolf studied her in the firelight. "You're very brave," he said quietly. "Or very foolish," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "Perhaps there is no difference sometimes." As the night deepened, Sarah found herself talking to Running Wolf about things she had never discussed with anyone. Perhaps it was the strange intimacy of the situation, or maybe the fact that he was essentially a stranger who might never see her again. But she opened up about her fears for the ranch, her worries about Tom, and the overwhelming responsibility she felt since her father's death. Running Wolf listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood the challenges of leadership and responsibility. In return, he began to speak about his own people, the pressure he felt as a war leader, and the impossible choices facing his tribe as white settlement continued to encroach on their lands. "We are not so different, your people and mine," Running Wolf observed during one of their conversations. "We both love our families, worry about the future, try to do what we think is right." "Then why are we at war?" Sarah asked. Running Wolf was quiet for a long time. "Because we both want the same thing," he said finally. "To live free on the land we love, but there is not enough land for both ways of life." The profound sadness in his voice made Sarah understand something she had never grasped before, that this conflict had no simple answers, no clear villains or heroes. It was a tragedy born of competing needs and incompatible ways of life. As Sarah drifted off to sleep on the floor near the fire, she wondered what the morning would bring. She had committed herself to helping Running Wolf, but she had no clear plan for what would happen next. All she knew was that she had found something unexpected in this encounter, a glimpse of the humanity on the other side of a conflict she had always seen in simple terms of us versus them. The last thing she remembered before sleep took her was the sound of Running Wolf's quiet breathing and the strange sense that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. Sarah woke to the sound of rain pattering against the roof of the lined shack. Gray morning light filtered through the single window, and for a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then she saw Running Wolf lying still on the cot, and the events of the previous day came flooding back. She quickly checked on her patient. His forehead was hot with fever, and the bandages around his leg showed fresh blood seepage. The infection was spreading despite her efforts to clean the wound. Sarah felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach as she realized how serious his condition had become overnight. Running Wolf's eyes opened as she touched his forehead. "The fever spirits have found me," he said weakly, using what Sarah assumed was his people's way of describing illness. "You're burning up," Sarah said, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "I need to get some medicine from town." "No," Running Wolf's hand caught her wrist with surprising strength for someone so ill. "Too dangerous. If they see you buying medicine and ask questions." Sarah knew he was right. Dr. Patterson would certainly want to know why she needed fever medicine and supplies for treating a serious wound. But without proper medication, Running Wolf would die. "Then I'll have to find another way," she said firmly. Sarah spent the morning gathering what natural remedies she could remember from her mother's teachings. She found willow bark near the stream for reducing fever and gathered plantain and comfrey for wound healing. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As she worked, Sarah found herself constantly glancing toward the horizon, watching for riders. The rain provided some cover, making it less likely that anyone would be out looking for stray cattle, but she knew her luck wouldn't hold forever. Tom would start to worry if she didn't return soon. When she came back to the shack with her gathered herbs, she found Running Wolf trying to sit up on the cot. His face was flushed with fever, and she could see the effort it cost him just to move. "You need to stay still," she scolded, gently pushing him back down. "You'll make the bleeding worse." "I have been thinking," Running Wolf said as Sarah began preparing the willow bark tea. "There is someone who might help, an old medicine woman among my people, she who heals, but she lives 2 days' ride from here." Sarah paused in her work. "You want me to bring her here?" "She has knowledge of plants and healing that could save my life, and she—" Running Wolf hesitated. "She has helped white people before in secret. She believes healing should not have boundaries." The idea terrified Sarah. Seeking out a Comanche medicine woman meant going deep into territory she didn't know, possibly encountering hostile warriors, and definitely putting herself in extreme danger. But looking at Running Wolf's flushed face, and seeing the way he struggled against the fever, she knew he wouldn't survive much longer without proper treatment. "How would I find her?" Sarah asked quietly. Running Wolf described the location of his band's current camp, hidden in a canyon system about a day's ride northeast. "Tell her Running Wolf sent you. Show her this." He struggled to remove a small leather pouch from around his neck, decorated with intricate beadwork. "She will know you speak truth." Sarah took the pouch, feeling the weight of what she was agreeing to do. "What if your people don't believe me? What if they think I'm a spy or a threat?" "She who heals has authority even among the warriors. If she says you are under her protection, no one will harm you." Running Wolf's eyes met hers. "But Sarah, you must understand, what you are considering is very dangerous. My people have reasons to hate whites just as your people have reasons to hate us." "Tell me about those reasons," Sarah said as she helped him drink the willow bark tea. "I want to understand." Over the next several hours, as the rain continued to fall outside their temporary refuge, Running Wolf told Sarah stories she had never heard before. He spoke of broken treaties, of peaceful villages attacked by soldiers, of children taken from their families and sent to distant schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language. 3 years ago, soldiers came to a winter camp on the Washita River, Running Wolf said, his voice heavy with memory. Women and children mostly, the warriors were away hunting. They killed everyone they could find. Sarah felt sick as she listened. She had heard of such incidents, but they had always been described to her as necessary actions against hostile savages. Hearing about them from Running Wolf's perspective, she began to understand the deep wells of pain and anger that fueled the conflict. "But surely you've raided white settlements too," Sarah said, not wanting to excuse her people's actions, but needing to understand the full scope of the violence. "Yes," Running Wolf admitted without trying to justify it. "We have taken horses, cattle, sometimes we have killed, but usually it was in response to attacks on our people or because we were starving and had no other choice." "The missing cattle from my ranch," Sarah realized suddenly. "Was that your people?" Running Wolf nodded slowly. "We took 12 head. My band has not been able to hunt buffalo in 2 moons because of increased cavalry patrols. The children were crying with hunger." Sarah absorbed this information in silence. Those cattle represented a significant financial loss for her struggling ranch, but she found herself unable to feel angry about it. The image of hungry children was more powerful than her concern about money. "Why didn't you just ask for help?" she said finally. "Some ranchers might have been willing to trade or negotiate." "Would you have traded with us if we had come to your door?" Running Wolf asked gently. Sarah started to say yes, then stopped. She tried to imagine how she would have reacted if a group of Comanche warriors had approached her ranch asking for cattle. Fear, suspicion, and years of conditioning would probably have made her reach for her rifle rather than consider negotiation. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Fear makes enemies of people who might otherwise be friends," Running Wolf observed. "On both sides." As the day wore on, Running Wolf's condition continued to deteriorate. The fever was getting worse, and Sarah could see red streaks beginning to spread up his leg from the wound site. She knew that meant blood poisoning was setting in, which would kill him within days if untreated. "I have to go find this medicine woman," Sarah said as evening approached. "You won't last another day like this." "It is too dangerous," Running Wolf protested weakly. "I will not have your death on my spirit." "And I won't have your death on my conscience," Sarah replied firmly. "Besides, I'm probably the only white person who could approach your people without starting a battle. They'll be curious about me rather than immediately hostile." Running Wolf studied her face in the firelight. "You are like no white woman I have ever heard of," he said finally. "Maybe that's a good thing," Sarah said with a smile that didn't quite hide her fear. She spent the evening preparing for the journey. Her horse needed rest, but she couldn't wait any longer. Sarah gathered what supplies she could carry and left most of her remaining food and water with Running Wolf. She also left her rifle, taking only her pistol for protection. "If I don't come back," she said as she prepared to leave, "or if someone else finds you first, don't tell them I was here. Make up a story about escaping the trap yourself." "Why does my reputation matter to you?" Running Wolf asked. "Because you're a good man in an impossible situation," Sarah replied. "And because someone should remember that people on both sides of this war tried to do the right thing." The night journey was treacherous. Sarah had to rely on Running Wolf's directions and her own sense of direction to navigate through unfamiliar territory in the darkness. She traveled slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible while still making progress toward the canyon where his people were camped. As dawn broke, Sarah found herself in rough, broken country filled with arroyos and rock formations. The landscape was beautiful in a stark way, but she could see how easy it would be to get lost or ambushed here. She began to understand why the Comanche had been so successful at avoiding capture. This land was perfect for someone who knew it well and impossible for outsiders to navigate. Sarah was studying Running Wolf's directions when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Her heart hammered as she realized she was about to encounter Comanche warriors on their own territory, with no way to run or hide. 3 riders appeared from behind a rock outcropping, and Sarah found herself surrounded before she could react. The warriors were all young men, painted for war and heavily armed. They shouted at her in their language, clearly agitated by finding a lone white woman in their territory. Sarah raised her hands to show she was unarmed, then held up Running Wolf's medicine pouch where they could see it. "She who heals," she said loudly, hoping they would understand at least that much. "Running Wolf sent me to find she who heals." The warriors exchanged rapid conversation that Sarah couldn't follow. One of them rode closer, examining the pouch she held. His expression changed when he recognized the beadwork, and he spoke more quietly to his companions. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the warriors gestured for Sarah to follow them. They rode in formation around her, making it clear she was their prisoner but not treating her roughly. Sarah tried to project calm confidence while her mind raced with fear and uncertainty. The Comanche camp was hidden in a canyon that could only be accessed through a narrow passage between rock walls. Sarah was amazed by how effectively concealed it was. She could have ridden within 100 yards of the entrance and never known the camp existed. As they emerged into the canyon, Sarah got her first look at a Comanche village. It was both similar to and different from what she had expected. The tipis were arranged in organized family groups, with a clear central area for communal activities. Children played between the lodges while women worked at various tasks. Men tended to horses or worked on weapons and equipment. But what struck Sarah most was how normal it all seemed. These weren't the savage warriors of frontier stories. They were families living their lives, dealing with the same basic needs for food, shelter, and security that occupied her own people. The arrival of a white woman caused a significant stir. People emerged from their tipis to stare at Sarah, and she could hear excited conversation in the Comanche language. Some of the looks were hostile, but many seemed more curious than threatening. The warriors led Sarah to a tipi that was larger than the others and decorated with symbols she didn't recognize. An elderly woman emerged, and Sarah knew immediately that this was she who heals. The medicine woman was small and bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She wore a dress of soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork, and her gray hair was braided with feathers and small bones. She who heals spoke to the warriors who had brought Sarah, examining the medicine pouch carefully. Then she turned to Sarah and spoke in heavily accented but understandable English. "You are the white woman who freed Running Wolf from the iron teeth." Sarah nodded, surprised that news of the incident had already reached the camp. "He's badly hurt, fever, infection. He said you might be able to help him." The old medicine woman studied Sarah's face for a long moment, as if trying to read her intentions. "Why do you risk yourself for one of the people?" "Because he needed help," Sarah said simply. "Because it was the right thing to do." She who heals nodded slowly. "Show me where he is." The medicine woman gathered her supplies with practiced efficiency, filling several leather pouches with herbs, powders, and tools that Sarah didn't recognize. She also selected a young warrior to accompany them, explaining to Sarah that his name was Swift Arrow and he was Running Wolf's younger brother. The journey back to the line shack took most of the day, but it felt much shorter to Sarah now that she wasn't traveling alone through hostile territory. She who heals proved to be an excellent traveling companion despite her age, and Swift Arrow's presence ensured they wouldn't be bothered by other Comanche patrols. During the ride, Sarah learned more about Running Wolf from his brother. Swift Arrow spoke less English than Running Wolf, but he managed to convey that his brother was highly respected among their people as both a warrior and a peace advocate. Running Wolf had argued against many of the more violent raids, preferring to focus on defensive actions and negotiations when possible. "He believes white man and Comanche can find peace," Swift Arrow said in his broken English. "Many warriors think he is foolish, but elders listen to him." This information gave Sarah new insight into Running Wolf's character. He wasn't just a warrior caught in an unfortunate situation. He was someone actively working for peace between their peoples. When they reached the line shack, Sarah's heart sank at Running Wolf's condition. He was unconscious, burning with fever, and the infection had clearly worsened. She who heals immediately took charge, examining the wound with gentle but thorough hands. The old medicine woman worked with swift efficiency, cleaning the wound with solutions that made the air sharp with unfamiliar scents. She applied poultices made from herbs Sarah didn't recognize, and chanted softly in the Comanche language as she worked. The iron teeth carry bad spirits, she who heals explained as she treated the wound. Must draw them out before they spread to his heart. Sarah watched in fascination as the medicine woman employed techniques that seemed part medicine, part ritual. But whatever she was doing, it seemed to be working. Within hours, Running Wolf's fever began to break, and he opened his eyes for the first time since Sarah had left. "Brother," Swift Arrow said softly in English, crouching beside the cot. Running Wolf's eyes focused with difficulty, then widened in surprise as he saw his brother and the medicine woman. He spoke rapidly in Comanche, and Sarah could tell he was asking how they had found him. "The white woman came to our camp," she who heals replied in English, presumably for Sarah's benefit. "She carries your medicine bundle and speaks of your need, very brave for white woman." Running Wolf's eyes found Sarah's across the small room. In his gaze, she saw gratitude, amazement, and something else she couldn't quite identify, a warmth that made her heart race unexpectedly. "You went to our people?" he asked weakly. "I told you I'd find help," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She who heals continued treating Running Wolf's wound while Swift Arrow prepared food over the fire. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself part of an unlikely group: a white rancher's daughter, an elderly Comanche medicine woman, and two warriors from a people supposedly at war with her own. Yet the atmosphere in the small shack was one of cooperation and mutual respect. She who heals treated Sarah as an equal, asking her questions about white medicine and sharing knowledge about healing herbs. Swift Arrow, despite the language barrier, made efforts to include her in their conversations. Most remarkably, Sarah felt completely safe. Despite everything she had been taught about the dangers of being alone with Comanche warriors, she knew instinctively that these people would protect her as one of their own. "Your medicine is working," Sarah observed as Running Wolf's color improved and his breathing became less labored. "Plants know no difference between white skin and red skin," she who heals replied with a slight smile. "Healing is healing." As the night deepened, Sarah realized that her world had fundamentally changed. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, had seen humanity where she had been taught to see only enemies. The experience had opened her eyes to possibilities she had never imagined. That peace might actually be possible between their peoples, that understanding could bridge even the deepest divides. But she also knew that the real challenges were just beginning. Eventually, she would have to return to her own world and find a way to reconcile what she had learned with the expectations and prejudices of her community. And Running Wolf would have to heal and return to his people, carrying with him the memory of a white woman who had risked everything to save his life. Neither of them could have predicted how profoundly this encounter would change both of their destinies. 3 days passed in the line shack, and the small space became a world unto itself. She who heals had declared that Running Wolf could not be moved until the infection was completely gone and his leg had begun to mend properly. Sarah found herself trapped between her duty to return home and her unwillingness to abandon Running Wolf before he was safe. Each morning brought new worries. Tom would be wondering where she was, possibly organizing search parties. The longer she stayed away, the harder it would become to explain her absence. But each evening, as she watched Running Wolf grow stronger under the medicine woman's care, she knew she couldn't leave yet. The enforced intimacy of their situation created an unexpected bond between all 4 people in the shack. Language barriers gradually broke down as they shared meals, took turns caring for Running Wolf, and passed the long hours in conversation. Sarah learned basic Comanche words while teaching English phrases to Swift Arrow. She who heals shared stories of her people's history and traditions, painting a picture of Comanche life that bore no resemblance to the savage stereotypes Sarah had grown up believing. But it was her growing connection with Running Wolf that truly transformed Sarah's understanding of herself and her world. As he recovered his strength, they talked for hours about everything from their different ways of life to their dreams for the future. She discovered that he was not just a warrior but also a storyteller, a strategist, and a man who thought deeply about the conflict tearing apart both their peoples. Before the white settlers came in large numbers, Running Wolf told her one evening as they sat by the fire, "My grandfather sometimes traded with the Spanish and later with the first Americans. There was respect, understanding. Each people stayed in their own lands and met only for trade and occasionally for counsel." "What changed?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Too many people wanting the same land. Running Wolf replied sadly. And perhaps leaders on both sides who preferred war to the hard work of finding peaceful solutions. Sarah had never thought about the conflict in those terms before. She had always seen it as a matter of civilization versus savagery, of her people bringing progress to a wild land. But listening to Running Wolf, she began to understand that from his perspective, they were the invaders, disrupting a way of life that had existed for generations. "Do you think there could ever be peace?" she asked. Running Wolf was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I used to believe so, but now I see how the wind blows. More white people come every season. They want farms where we hunt buffalo, towns where we make our camps. Eventually, there will be no room left for the old ways." The sadness in his voice touched something deep in Sarah's heart. She found herself wanting to comfort him, to offer hope, even though she couldn't honestly say she saw a solution to the seemingly impossible situation. "Maybe the answer isn't choosing between the old ways and the new ways," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's finding a way to blend them to create something that honors both." Running Wolf looked at her with surprise. "You think a white woman and a Comanche warrior could find common ground?" "We already have," Sarah pointed out, gesturing around the shack where they had spent 3 days living in harmony. Their eyes met across the fire, and Sarah felt something shift between them. What had begun as simple human compassion was deepening into something more complex and dangerous. She could see in Running Wolf's gaze that he felt it too, the growing attraction that should have been impossible given their circumstances. She Who Heals seemed to notice the tension developing between Sarah and Running Wolf. The old medicine woman watched them with sharp eyes but said nothing, though Sarah sometimes caught her smiling slightly at their interactions. On the 4th morning, She Who Heals announced that Running Wolf was well enough to travel. The infection was gone, and though his leg was still weak, it would heal properly with time and care. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and panic at this news. Relief that Running Wolf would survive and recover fully, but panic at the thought of their strange little fellowship coming to an end. "You must return to your people," She Who Heals told Sarah as she packed her medicines. "And we must take Running Wolf home to finish healing." Sarah nodded, knowing the medicine woman was right. But the thought of simply parting ways and never seeing Running Wolf again felt like losing something precious she hadn't even realized she had found. "Will you be safe traveling?" Sarah asked, though she knew it was a foolish question. These people had been surviving in this harsh country long before she was born. "We know every rock and tree between here and our camp," Swift Arrow assured her with a grin. "No cavalry patrol will find us unless we want to be found." As they prepared to leave the line shack, Running Wolf pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. He moved carefully, still favoring his injured leg, but his eyes were clear and strong. "I owe you my life," he said simply. "That creates a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," Sarah replied. "I did what anyone should have done." "No," Running Wolf said firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. You risked everything for a stranger, an enemy. That kind of courage and compassion is rare in any people." Sarah felt herself blushing under his intense gaze. "I just couldn't walk away from someone who needed help." "It was more than that, and we both know it." Running Wolf stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "From the moment our eyes first met, something passed between us, something that should not exist between our peoples but does anyway." Sarah's heart pounded as he voiced what she had been trying not to acknowledge. The attraction she felt toward Running Wolf went far beyond gratitude or simple human kindness. Despite every rational reason why it was impossible, she had fallen in love with this Comanche warrior. "It doesn't matter what we feel," she said, forcing herself to be practical. "Our worlds are too different. There's no place for us in either of them." "Perhaps," Running Wolf agreed, "but that doesn't make the feelings any less real." He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek. Sarah closed her eyes, memorizing the feeling of his touch, knowing it might be the only time she would ever experience it. "I will not forget you, Sarah Mitchell," Running Wolf said softly. "Whatever happens in the days to come, know that you changed something in me that can never be changed back." "And you've changed me too," Sarah whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I'll never see the world the same way again." They stood there for a long moment, two people from different worlds who had found something precious and impossible together. Then She Who Heals called out that it was time to go, and the spell was broken. The parting was harder than Sarah had expected. She had known Running Wolf for less than a week, but in that time he had become more real to her than most people she had known her entire life. As she watched him mount his horse with Swift Arrow's help, she felt as if part of herself was being torn away. "Be safe," she called out as they prepared to ride away. "You too," Running Wolf replied. "And Sarah, if you ever need help, if you are ever in danger, leave a white cloth tied to the old oak tree by Willow Creek. I will know to come." Sarah nodded, though she couldn't imagine circumstances that would make her ask for help from a Comanche warrior. The three riders disappeared into the morning mist, leaving Sarah alone with her horse and her dramatically altered understanding of the world. The ride back to her ranch gave Sarah time to think about how she would explain her 4-day absence. She had decided to stick with the story about searching for the missing cattle, claiming that her horse had thrown a shoe and she'd had to hole up during the storm. It wasn't a perfect explanation, but it was plausible enough to avoid too many questions. She need not have worried about Tom's suspicions. Her younger brother was so relieved to see her safely home that he didn't question her story very closely. He had indeed been organizing a search party, and several neighbors were already gathered at the ranch house when Sarah arrived. "Sarah, thank God you're all right," Tom exclaimed, rushing to help her down from her horse. "We thought something terrible had happened to you." "I'm fine," Sarah assured him, trying to project calm confidence. "Just a few delays that couldn't be helped." Among the gathered neighbors was Jake Patterson, Dr. Patterson's son, and a man who had been trying to court Sarah for the past year. Jake was a decent enough man, hardworking, honest, and financially stable, but Sarah had never felt more than mild friendship toward him. Now, looking at his earnest face as he expressed relief at her safe return, she felt as if she were seeing him from across a vast distance. "You shouldn't go off alone like that," Jake said earnestly. "This country isn't safe for a woman traveling by herself. There are Comanche raiders all through this area." Sarah nodded and made appropriate responses, but Jake's words struck her as deeply ironic. She had just spent 4 days in the company of Comanche people and had never felt safer in her life. Over the next few days, Sarah struggled to readjust to her normal routine. Everything seemed the same on the surface, the same chores, the same people, the same conversations. But she felt like a different person living in a familiar world. Her experience with Running Wolf and his people had opened her eyes to perspectives and possibilities she had never imagined. The hardest part was pretending that nothing had changed. When her neighbors spoke about Indians with casual hatred and fear, Sarah found herself biting her tongue to keep from defending them. When Jake Patterson mentioned seeing cavalry patrols in the area and expressing hope that they would clear out the savages, Sarah had to excuse herself from the conversation to keep from saying something that would reveal too much. A week after her return, Sarah was working in her vegetable garden when she noticed a rider approaching the ranch house. Her heart leaped with irrational hope that it might be Running Wolf, but as the figure drew closer, she recognized Dr. Patterson. The doctor dismounted and walked over to where Sarah was working, his expression serious. "Miss Mitchell, I need to speak with you about something important." Sarah's blood turned cold, wondering if somehow her secret had been discovered. "What about, Dr. Patterson?" "There are rumors going around town about Comanche activity in this area. Some folks are saying there might be a camp hidden somewhere nearby." The doctor studied Sarah's face carefully. "You haven't seen any sign of Indians during your recent travels, have you?" "No," Sarah lied smoothly, maintaining eye contact. "Nothing at all." Dr. Patterson nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Well, be extra careful. The Army is planning a sweep of this area next week. If there are any hostiles hiding out here, they'll find them." After the doctor left, Sarah sat in her garden, her hands shaking as she absorbed this information. A military sweep meant that Running Wolf's people were in immediate danger. Even if they moved their camp, the soldiers would track them down if they were determined enough. That evening, Sarah couldn't concentrate on anything. She kept thinking about Running Wolf's offer to help if she ever needed it, and wondering if the reverse was true. Did she have any obligation to warn him about the approaching danger? The rational answer was no. These people were technically her enemies, and warning them about military operations could be considered treason. But Sarah found that her heart was stronger than her rational mind. The thought of Running Wolf or she who heals or Swift Arrow being killed or captured in a surprise attack was unbearable. The next morning, Sarah announced to Tom that she was going to town to buy supplies. Instead, she rode hard toward Willow Creek, carrying a white cloth in her saddlebags. She had no idea if Running Wolf would see her signal or respond to it, but she had to try. The old oak tree by Willow Creek was exactly where she remembered it from childhood. Sarah tied the white cloth to a prominent branch, making sure it would be visible from a distance. Then she settled down to wait, not knowing if anyone would come or how long she should stay. Hours passed with no sign of movement. Sarah began to wonder if she had misremembered the location, or if Running Wolf's people had already moved too far away to see her signal. She was preparing to give up when she heard the soft sound of hoofbeats approaching. Running Wolf emerged from the tree line, riding alone and moving carefully. Sarah's heart leaped at the sight of him, and she realized how much she had missed him during their separation. "You came," she said as he dismounted near the tree. "I promised I would," Running Wolf replied. "Are you in danger?" "You are," Sarah said urgently. "The army is planning a sweep of this area. They know there's a Comanche camp somewhere nearby." Running Wolf's expression grew grave. "When?" "Next week sometime. Dr. Patterson didn't give me specifics, but soon." "Why are you warning me?" Running Wolf asked. "This puts you at great risk if anyone discovers what you've done." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Because I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you or your people when I could have prevented it." Running Wolf studied her face for a long moment. "You continue to amaze me, Sarah Mitchell. Few people would risk themselves for former enemies." "You're not my enemy," Sarah said quietly. "You never were." The intensity of his gaze made Sarah's heart race. She could see that the feelings between them had only grown stronger during their separation, not weaker as she had hoped. "I must warn my people and help them prepare to move," Running Wolf said reluctantly. "But Sarah, this changes everything. If you're willing to risk yourself to protect us, then perhaps there is hope for something I thought was impossible." "What do you mean?" Running Wolf stepped closer, his expression intense. "I mean that maybe two people from different worlds can find a way to build something together. It won't be easy, and it will require sacrifices from both of us, but—" "But what?" Sarah whispered, hardly daring to hope. "But if you're willing to try, I am too. We've already proven that understanding is possible between our peoples. Maybe we can be an example of what could be." Sarah felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Running Wolf was suggesting something that went far beyond warning him about military operations. He was talking about a future together, despite all the obstacles that stood in their way. "It would mean giving up everything I've known," she said, thinking aloud. "For me too," Running Wolf agreed, "but some things are worth any sacrifice." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the same longing she felt in her own heart. The connection between them had grown beyond simple attraction into something deeper and more powerful. Despite the impossibility of their situation, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm willing to try." Running Wolf's face lit up with joy and relief. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "Then we will find a way, no matter how difficult the path." As they stood together beside Willow Creek, Sarah knew that her life had just taken another dramatic turn. She was choosing love over security, understanding over prejudice, hope over fear. The future was uncertain and would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but for the first time in her life, Sarah felt as if she was moving toward something truly worth fighting for. The weeks following Sarah's secret meeting with Running Wolf were filled with tension and uncertainty. The military sweep had indeed taken place, but Running Wolf's people had managed to evade capture by moving deeper into the canyon country. However, the increased military presence in the area made any further contact between Sarah and the Comanche band extremely dangerous. Sarah found herself living a double life that became increasingly difficult to maintain. During the day, she went through the motions of her normal routine, managing the ranch, dealing with neighbors, and fending off Jake Patterson's persistent courtship attempts. But at night, she lay awake thinking about Running Wolf and wondering if she would ever see him again. The strain began to show in ways she couldn't entirely hide. Tom noticed that his sister seemed distracted and worried about something, though he attributed it to their continuing financial difficulties. The ranch was still struggling, and they had received notice that the bank would foreclose on their mortgage if they couldn't make a substantial payment within 2 months. "We might have to sell the south pasture," Tom said one evening as they reviewed their accounts. It's not enough to satisfy the whole debt, but it might buy us more time. Sarah nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. The south pasture bordered the canyon country where Running Wolf's people had retreated. Selling it to new settlers would bring even more white families into the area, increasing the pressure on the Comanche and making any future contact even more impossible. Maybe we should consider Jake Patterson's proposal, Tom continued, misreading Sarah's silence. He's made it clear he'd be willing to help with the ranch's debts if you married him. The suggestion made Sarah feel trapped and desperate. Jake had indeed hinted that marriage to him would solve their financial problems, but the thought of tying herself to him for life when her heart belonged to someone else was unbearable. "I won't marry someone just to save the ranch," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not asking you to marry someone you don't love," Tom replied, looking hurt. "I just thought, well, Jake's a good man and you could do worse." Sarah felt guilty for snapping at her brother. Tom was trying to find practical solutions to their problems, and he had no way of knowing that her heart was already given to someone he would consider an enemy. 2 days later, Sarah was surprised to receive a visit from Father Miguel, the elderly priest who served the small Catholic community in the area. Father Miguel was unusual among the local white population in that he had spent years ministering to Mexican and Indian communities and spoke several languages fluently. "Miss Mitchell," the priest said after Tom had served coffee and discreetly left them alone, "I've come to speak with you about a rather delicate matter." Sarah's heart began to race, wondering if somehow her secret had been discovered. "What kind of matter, Father?" "I've been approached by someone who claims to know you," Father Miguel said carefully. "Someone who wishes to arrange a meeting but cannot do so safely through normal means." Sarah gripped her coffee cup tightly, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "I'm not sure I understand." Father Miguel studied her face closely. "I think you do understand, my child. The question is whether you're willing to take a considerable risk to see this person again." "How do you know about?" Sarah began, then stopped herself. "I've spent my life ministering to all of God's children, regardless of their race or tribe," the priest said gently. "Sometimes that means serving as a bridge between worlds that seem impossible to connect." Sarah realized that Father Miguel somehow knew about her relationship with Running Wolf. The priest had a reputation for helping people in difficult situations, often acting as a mediator between different communities. "Is he safe?" Sarah asked, abandoning any pretense. "For now, but the situation is becoming more dangerous every day. The military pressure is forcing his people to consider options they had hoped to avoid." "What kind of options?" Father Miguel was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "They're being pressed to either move to the reservation or face increasing military action. Neither choice offers much hope for maintaining their traditional way of life." Sarah felt sick at the thought of Running Wolf and his people being forced onto a reservation. From everything she had heard, conditions on the reservations were harsh, with inadequate food and medical care and strict restrictions on movement and cultural practices. "What does he want to see me about?" Sarah asked. "That's not for me to say," Father Miguel replied. "But I believe he has a proposal that could change both of your lives dramatically." The priest arranged for the meeting to take place at an abandoned mission chapel about 10 miles from Sarah's ranch. It was a location that offered privacy while still being on neutral ground that neither the military nor Comanche war parties were likely to patrol. Sarah told Tom she was going to visit a neighbor who was ill, hatting herself for the deception but seeing no alternative. The ride to the old chapel took her through some of the most beautiful country in Texas, but she was too anxious to appreciate the scenery. Running Wolf was already waiting when she arrived at the crumbling stone building. He looked thinner than when she had seen him last, and there was a tension in his posture that spoke of constant stress and worry. But his eyes lit up when he saw her, and Sarah felt her heart lift at the sight of him. "You came," he said simply, echoing her words from their last meeting. "I'll always come," Sarah replied, then blushed at the implications of her statement. They sat together on the stone steps of the ruined chapel, and Running Wolf told her about the impossible situation facing his people. The military patrols had made hunting nearly impossible, and food was becoming scarce. Several other Comanche bands had already been forced onto reservations, and the pressure on the remaining free bands was increasing daily. "Our choices are surrender or constant warfare," Running Wolf said with obvious pain. Neither path offers hope for our children's future. What will you do? Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the vast landscape that his people had roamed for generations. There is a third option, but it would require giving up everything I have known. What option? Father Miguel has told me of places where people of different races can live together without persecution. California, perhaps, or some of the northern territories. Places where a man and woman could build a new life together, regardless of their backgrounds. Sarah's heart began to race as she understood what he was suggesting. You're talking about leaving everything behind. Yes, my people, your people, this land, everything. Running Wolf turned to face her directly. But I would do it if you would come with me. We could start over somewhere else, create our own family, our own life. The proposal was breathtaking in its audacity. Running Wolf was offering to abandon his role as a war leader, his responsibilities to his tribe, and his entire cultural identity to build a life with her. It was the ultimate gesture of love and commitment. But Sarah also understood what he would be asking of her. She would have to leave Tom to manage the ranch alone, abandon her community and family, and venture into an uncertain future with a man from a completely different world. What about your people? Sarah asked. Don't they need you? They need someone to lead them to survival, Running Wolf replied sadly. I'm beginning to think that leader cannot be me. The old ways of warfare and resistance are no longer enough. My people need leaders who can find new ways to preserve what matters while adapting to changed circumstances. Sarah could hear the pain in his voice as he spoke of abandoning his people, and she realized how much this decision was costing him. He was offering to sacrifice everything he had been raised to value for the chance of a life with her. And my ranch, my brother, that is for you to decide, Running Wolf said gently. I cannot ask you to abandon your responsibilities. I can only tell you that I love you more than my own life and that I'm willing to build whatever future you choose as long as we're together. The word love hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken it aloud. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at this man who was offering her his heart and his entire future. I love you too, she whispered, more than I ever thought possible. Running Wolf reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Then we can face whatever comes together. They sat in silence for a while, both understanding the magnitude of the decision they were contemplating. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think through all the implications. Could she really abandon everything she had known for an uncertain future with Running Wolf? Could she leave Tom to struggle with the ranch alone? Could she turn her back on her community and culture? But then she looked at Running Wolf's face and saw the same struggles reflected there. He was wrestling with equally difficult choices, yet he had chosen love over duty, hope over tradition. How would we live? Sarah asked practically. What would we do for money? Where would we go? Father Miguel has contacts in California who help people in situations like ours, Running Wolf explained. There are communities there where mixed couples can live openly. I have skills as a hunter and tracker that white settlers value. You have knowledge of farming and business. Together, we could build something. Sarah tried to imagine such a life, living in a place where their love wouldn't be scandalous or dangerous, where they could have children who wouldn't have to choose between two cultures, where they could be judged by their character rather than their race. It wouldn't be easy, she said, still thinking through the practical challenges. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Running Wolf replied. But Sarah, we've already proven that understanding is possible between our peoples. Maybe we can be an example of what the future could hold. The idealism in his voice touched something deep in Sarah's heart. Perhaps they really could be pioneers of a different sort, not conquering new territory, but creating new possibilities for human connection and understanding. When would we have to leave? She asked, realizing that she was seriously considering his proposal. Soon, the situation here is becoming impossible. Every day we delay makes discovery more likely. Running Wolf's grip on her hand tightened. But I won't pressure you. This has to be your choice made freely. Sarah appreciated his restraint, but she could see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. He wanted her to say yes so desperately that it hurt to look at him. I need time to think, she said finally, and I need to find a way to secure Tom's future before I can consider leaving. Running Wolf nodded, though Sarah could see his disappointment. How long? Give me 2 weeks. If I can find a solution for Tom and the ranch, then, Sarah took a deep breath. Then yes, I'll go with you. The joy that spread across Running Wolf's face was worth all the uncertainty she was feeling. He lifted their joined hands to his lips and kissed her fingers gently. 2 weeks, he agreed. And Sarah, whatever you decide, know that you have given me the greatest gift of my life, the knowledge that love can transcend any boundary. As they prepared to part again, Sarah felt the weight of the decision she had committed to making. In 2 weeks, she would have to choose between the security of her familiar world and the uncertain promise of a new life with the man she loved. The ride home gave her time to think about possibilities she had never seriously considered before. Could she convince someone to buy the ranch for enough money to pay off the mortgage and leave Tom with a nest egg for his future? Could she bear to leave her brother when he was still learning to manage on his own? More fundamentally, did she have the courage to step into an unknown future based solely on love and faith? As Sarah guided her horse through the familiar landscape of her childhood, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was being called to make a choice based entirely on her own heart, rather than duty, tradition, or expectations. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. 2 weeks to decide the course of the rest of her life. 2 weeks to find a way to honor both her love for Running Wolf and her responsibilities to Tom. 2 weeks to summon the courage to either embrace an impossible dream or let it go forever. Sarah had never faced a more difficult decision, but she also had never felt more alive with possibility. The 2 weeks that followed Sarah's meeting with Running Wolf passed like a blur of desperate planning and emotional turmoil. Sarah threw herself into finding a solution that would allow her to leave with a clear conscience, but every option seemed to create new problems. Her first hope was that she could find a buyer for the ranch who would be willing to keep Tom on as a partner or manager. She discreetly approached several neighboring ranchers, but none were interested in taking on the property's debts along with an inexperienced young partner. Jake Patterson, sensing Sarah's growing desperation though not understanding its source, renewed his marriage proposal with even more persistence. He made it clear that marrying him would solve all the ranch's financial problems and secure Tom's future. "I don't understand your hesitation," Jake said during one particularly pressing conversation. "We've known each other for years. I can provide for you and help your family. What more could you want?" Sarah wanted to scream that she wanted love, passion, and a partner who saw her as an equal rather than a prize to be won. But she could only smile politely and ask for more time to consider his offer. The cruel irony was that Jake's proposal would indeed solve her practical problems. Tom would be secure, the ranch would be saved, and she would have a comfortable if loveless life. It was exactly the kind of sensible choice that everyone expected her to make. But having tasted the possibility of true love and genuine partnership, Sarah found she could no longer settle for mere security and social approval. Running Wolf had awakened something in her that could never be satisfied by a conventional marriage to a man she didn't love. 8 days into her deadline, Sarah received unexpected help from an equally unexpected source. Dr. Patterson approached her with a proposition that caught her completely off guard. "Miss Mitchell," the doctor said after requesting a private meeting, "I have a business proposal that might interest you." Sarah listened with growing amazement as Dr. Patterson explained that he had been looking for investment opportunities and was interested in purchasing the ranch as a speculation. He would pay off the mortgage, give Tom a substantial sum for his share, and offer to employ Tom as the ranch manager with the opportunity to buy the property back within 5 years. "Why?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to believe this stroke of good fortune. "Because I believe this land will be very valuable in the coming years," Dr. Patterson replied. "And because I've watched you and your brother struggle since your father's death. You're good people who deserve better luck." Sarah nearly wept with relief and gratitude. The doctor's offer would not only solve her immediate problems, but would actually leave Tom in a better financial position than he had been before their father's death. But her relief was tempered by guilt when she realized she would be taking advantage of Dr. Patterson's kindness to abandon her community for a life with a Comanche warrior. If the doctor knew what she was planning, would he still be willing to help? Sarah decided she couldn't deceive someone who was showing her such generosity. "Dr. Patterson, there's something you should know before you make this offer." "And what's that?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was taking an enormous risk. I'm planning to leave this area permanently. I won't be here to help Tom manage the ranch or to be part of this community. Dr. Patterson studied her face carefully. May I ask where you're planning to go? California, Sarah said, sticking to the partial truth. I have an opportunity there. I see. The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Miss Mitchell, I've lived on this frontier for 20 years. I've seen families torn apart by war, prejudice, and misunderstanding. I've also seen a few rare cases where people found the courage to follow their hearts despite enormous obstacles. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, wondering how much the doctor had guessed about her situation. Whatever your reasons for leaving, Dr. Patterson continued, if this arrangement helps you find the life you're meant to live, then I'm glad to offer it. Your brother is a good young man who will do well with the right support. The unexpected kindness and understanding in his voice nearly broke Sarah's composure. She had been prepared for condemnation and rejection, not compassion and help. Thank you, she managed to whisper. Just promise me one thing, Dr. Patterson said gently. Write to your brother occasionally. Let him know you're safe and happy. Family connections shouldn't be completely severed, even when people must choose different paths. Sarah agreed readily to this condition. She had been planning to maintain contact with Tom anyway, though she knew the letters would have to be carefully written to avoid revealing too much about her new life. The legal arrangements were completed within 3 days, leaving Sarah with just 3 days before her deadline with Running Wolf. She still had to tell Tom that she was leaving, a conversation she had been dreading more than any other aspect of her decision. She chose to break the news on the evening after the papers were signed, when they were sitting together on the porch watching the sunset. It seemed like an appropriate time to discuss endings and new beginnings. Tom, I need to tell you something important, Sarah began, her heart hammering with nervousness. Her brother looked up from the account books he had been reviewing. If it's about the ranch sale, I still can't believe Dr. Patterson made such a generous offer. It's like a miracle. It's not about the sale directly, Sarah said. It's about what I'm planning to do now that your future is secure. Tom set down his papers and gave her his full attention. What do you mean? I'm leaving, Tom. I'm going to California to start a new life. Tom stared at her in shock. Leaving? But Sarah, this is your home. This is where you belong. Sarah had prepared several explanations for her decision, ranging from a desire for adventure to better economic opportunities in California. But looking at her brother's confused and hurt expression, she found she couldn't lie to him. There's someone, she said simply, someone I love who can't live here safely. Someone you love? Tom's confusion deepened. But who? I haven't seen you courting anyone except Jake, and you've been turning him down for months. Sarah took a deep breath. It's complicated, Tom, more complicated than you can imagine. Try me. For a moment, Sarah considered telling Tom the complete truth. He deserved to understand her decision fully. But she also knew that involving him in her secret would put him in a dangerous position if questions were ever asked. I can't tell you everything, she said finally. But I can tell you that I've found the kind of love that comes along once in a lifetime, the kind that's worth any sacrifice. Tom studied his sister's face in the fading light. And this person can't live here? Why? Because this community would never accept him, Sarah replied honestly. Understanding began to dawn in Tom's eyes, though Sarah could see he didn't want to believe what he was thinking. Sarah, please tell me you're not talking about what I think you're talking about. I love him, Tom, and he loves me, nothing else matters. Tom stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in agitation. Sarah, do you understand what you're saying? Do you realize what this means? I realize that I have a chance for real happiness, and I'm not going to let fear or prejudice stop me from taking it. It's not prejudice, Tom exploded. It's common sense. These people are our enemies. They've killed our neighbors, stolen our cattle. And we've killed their families and stolen their land, Sarah replied quietly. The cycle of violence has to end somewhere, Tom. Why can't it end with understanding and love? Tom stared at her as if she had become a stranger. I can't believe you're choosing them over your own people, over your own family. The pain in his voice cut Sarah to the heart. I'm not choosing them over you. I'm choosing love over hate, hope over fear. What you're choosing is exile, Tom said bitterly. Once you leave with him, you can never come back. You'll be dead to this community and probably to me too. The threat hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had known that leaving would mean sacrificing her place in her community, but she hadn't considered that Tom might reject her completely. "Don't say that," she pleaded. "You're my brother, I love you." "Then stay," Tom said simply. "Choose your family over this impossible fantasy." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at her brother's anguished expression. He was asking her to choose between the two most important people in her life, and there was no way to make that choice without breaking her heart. "I can't," she whispered. "I won't live a half-life when I could have real love and genuine partnership." Tom was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening landscape. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with sadness rather than anger. "I don't understand your choice, Sarah, but I can see that you've already made it." He turned to face her directly. "I won't pretend to approve, but you're still my sister. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for." The grudging acceptance in his voice,